Welcome back to Wake Up with Nubian Tigers Talk, a podcast brought to you by a group of Black Princetonians where we talk about issues that impact our Black communities. So, Ray, over the past 2 years, we've had a number of shows that where we've discussed various different health disparities.
Right. Yeah. Health disparities within the Black and Brown communities. We had podcasts about COVID. We had podcasts about, retired athletes and their issues in their health and trying to get themselves together. But there's a portion of it that we really haven't had a chance to cover yet. And that involves the area or the profession of physical therapy. Right. So who do we have? Who do we have to help us with that?
So coincidentally, today we have with us Hadia Green, physical therapist, a DPT, describes herself as an equity lens community integrator who specializes in movement. She attained her bachelor's degree in sociology from Princeton University in 1998, where she also ran track and field and played volleyball. After graduation, she earned a doctorate of physical therapy from Washington University in St. Louis in 2004. Dr. Green is a board-certified clinical specialist in sports physical therapy. She started looking into health disparities related research from prostate cancer to children with ADHD in 1998, and later focused on treatment and function around musculoskeletal conditions. She also started coaching collegiate and high school sports and offers personal training to adults of all ages. Dr. Green's 17 years plus of clinical physical therapy practice included 6 years in the clinical practice department of the American Physical Therapy Association. She's worked with all age groups and diverse populations, including populations from Wall Street, Harlem, New York City, Mayo Clinic, and Washington, D.C. As a founder of Healthy Healing Community, a subsidiary of Hadia Green LLC, she specializes in sickness and injury prevention, health promotion and wellness through movement on an individual and population level. Welcome to the show, Hadia.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So Ray and I were discussing the fact that few Black people actually have had experience with physical therapists. So I'm wondering, just to start us off, can you explain to our audience, one, what a physical therapist is and what you do, and what's the difference between physical therapy and occupational therapy?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I like to think a good way to describe what a physical therapist does by one, describing some of the training. So a physical therapist is someone who has gone to school for 4 years for their undergraduate degree, and it can be in anything from sociology, like mine, to biology. And then they go to a 3-year graduate program, which is a doctor of physical therapy. So it's a clinical doctorate comparable to how medical doctors have an MD. So it's that level of doctorate, so clinical. And what physical therapists do, or what they're experts at by the time they graduate, is movement. So they are movement specialists who are able to look at all the systems of the body with the lens of movement. So that can be your circulation, your cardiovascular or pulmonary system, your physiological being, your muscles, your nervous system. So all of these systems have some type of movement component related to them. And movement either impacts those systems or vice versa. The system can impact how one moves. And so as movement experts, we're able to look at all the various systems and help people to maximize their function, prevent maladies, whether it's physical or actual physiological diseases like diabetes or heart disease, and also to help people recover when they do have infarcts like strokes or an injury on the football field. So it's really a gamut of movement expertise that we contribute in this space based on the training that we have. And we're different than occupational therapists, and I don't like to speak to what occupational therapists do, but I can share that there is crossover in what occupational therapists and physical therapists do, and we really enjoy working together. And occupational therapists, in addition to addressing some of the physical well-being of somebody, really are experts. Some of their expertise lies in a person's functionality. So how is it that you are going to function in your kitchen now that your whole right side is paralyzed? How is it that now that you had a head injury that seems to have some permanent damage, how can we measure where you are cognitively and give you some cognitive goals so that that can improve and keep you safe as you progress through your healing stages? So they actually have a lot more cognitive behavioral infused in their approach to a person's well-being and function, but there is some crossover as far as the physical well-being as well.
Okay, I don't think I knew that about occupational therapists. So that's interesting too. So what led you to choose physical therapy as your career?
I always wanted to be a pediatrician as a child because I think that we're all supposed to be doctors, attorneys, or police officers. And then I had a brother when I was 12 years old. Well, I shouldn't say it that way, but that's a Freudian non-slip because that brother actually called me mommy because I was with him the same amount or if not more time than my mom at the time. And he was born traumatically. They had depoprevia, which means that he separated from my mother in the womb. And so we didn't know that until after the fact, but my mom bled so much that the whole bathroom floor was full of blood. And I was old enough that when he was pre-diagnosed with cerebral palsy, that I was part of his home care plan. So the physical therapist who used to come to the home used to teach me some of the exercises to do with him as a baby. And that's when I was like, oh, I love this hands-on approach because I've always been a person who loves to and learns by doing and physically handling things. So it was a nice fit for me to merge my desire to help people, my desire to be in the health field, and I got to add that aspect of hands-on, and I could see what it did for my brother because my brother is now a typically physically functioning adult in his 30s. So it's pretty fantastic.
Thanks to you and your efforts.
Thanks. I try.
Well, Hadia, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to get into the, so our Black and Brown communities suffer with many different kinds of chronic health issues. And, during your career, Hadia, have you seen this, have you seen the issues that our people have and the effects of the ailments and how did it impact you in your profession?
Thank you for the question, Ray. I was fortified every single year and break between schools at physical therapy and our community and the Black community were an unseen, a regularly unseen relationship that needed to happen. And by that, I mean, I'm definitely a bi-coastal baby, but I'm Harlem to the core, do or die. And in our native village of Manhattan, I always saw people who I thought either one, if they got physical therapy, it didn't last as long as it needed to. Maybe they got discharged early because of insurance. Maybe they didn't know that that was something that they could appeal. When they did get discharged, maybe their therapist was overworked because they're going to Harlem Hospital, and even though it's managed by Columbia University, and those doctors are coming from there, that their census is so high that they're not able to provide the care or at the level that they are trained of. And I see people with permanent injuries, disabilities, and maladies daily in Harlem, and it hurts my soul and my core, but moreover motivated me to stick in this pathway into physical therapy where I could be one of the additional therapists to the brown ones that I saw in Harlem Hospital at the time, and be a force of health and wellness and well-being. And for me, I'm not a proponent for sick care. I think that that is the biggest crookery of our healthcare system, and that we get paid for people to become and stay sick. And that's capitalism realized in the healthcare model that we have. And for me, even as I graduated in 2004, my first job in business proposal had prevention in it, right? How do we keep people well? And that's what I think is missed on us as Black people, especially in the healthcare system. And physical therapy is even more of a missed opportunity for us because there's less knowledge about it existing, right? Everybody knows there's a primary care, but everybody doesn't know that there are physical therapists, let alone what they do, let alone that you could potentially go to a physical therapist without a prescription, because there's direct access. There's direct access in every single state in the United States. But the crookery, in my opinion, behind that is that it looks different from state to state. Some states will say that you need a prescription from a doctor to go to them. Some will say that you can see your therapist for 30 days or just an evaluation. And others will say you need a doctorate degree, even though as a physical therapist, to employ direct access, like in Virginia, because even though you may have had 25 years of experience and know that if you have somebody in your space, you can look at them and discern whether or not they need to go to the ER, to the doctor, have a referral, or be co-treated. So those inconsistencies put up barriers, more barriers than already come with people's practitioners' biases. And so then you have your biases become magnified, whether you're conscious of them or not as a practitioner, because you have to decide for yourself now, is this person in front of me worth going through those hoops? Right.
So let me back you up just a little bit. How does one get access to a physical therapist? What's the process by which you can even be advised or get information about the need to go to a physical therapist?
So there are several avenues to go to the physical therapist. If you're lucky enough to be in a neighborhood that has a physical therapy facility or a hospital, you could walk in and ask to be set up for an appointment. That person at the front desk will tell you whether or not you need a prescription to be seen, but you definitely don't need a prescription to make an appointment, right? They just need the prescription. If their facility requires a prescription, then they'll tell you that upon making your appointment. And again, sometimes it's not the state or the facility that wants the prescription. It may actually be it's not the Practice Act. In other words, when I say the state, it may be that the insurance company won't pay for your visit without a prescription. And so again, that's part of that capitalism and healthcare that I spoke to a little bit earlier again. So the other way is to, if you are fortunate enough to have insurance, is to call your insurance company or go on your website or your mobile app and just look up physical therapist by your zip code to see where you could go. If you're already in the hospital for some other condition, you can ask your doctor to give you a referral for physical therapists. A lot of doctors don't even know all that you can be referred to physical therapy for. So in other words, if you have incontinence, right? So you're peeing every time you cough or sneeze, there are physical therapists who can help you with your pelvic condition and help you train the muscles that control some of the functionality of going to the bathroom in unintentionally. There are even nerves. One is located in your lower leg that physical therapists are really well trained at, and so are neurologists, but neurologists don't like to use their time for such a small procedure that can be stimulated in your leg that will actually help you with incontinence. Like, I don't expect doctors to know that, but I also don't expect doctors to overlook us and not do their due diligence in learning all the span of what we can do in physical therapy, because who wouldn't rather do that than go to your urologist and have a surgery, or your OB-GYN to do a surgery, at least as a primary step, right? Go to your PT, because what we do know, even if that didn't cure you of incontinence, since I'm using that example, what we do know that people who have physical therapy prior to surgery usually have stronger and longer lasting outcomes. So it's a win-win no matter whether the physical therapy completely absolves that condition.
Okay. Wow. That's yeah. No,
Several
that's
different
pretty
Well,
ways.
interesting.
I've got to check out that nerve in my leg.
Listen,
No, it's
I
interesting.
didn't know either. And I went to surgery. I've had the surgery, and I said to myself, I should have gone to a PT.
What I'm getting ready to say is that's interesting because both Ray and I have had surgery that required PT afterwards, and it was well, at least for me, I'm going to say it was never mentioned to me that maybe
Nope.
physical therapy should have come first.
Nope.
Right. And I feel like that with pregnant women, and particularly women who were born in the 70s and before, I used to have so many of them become my patients because when C-sections didn't used to be a C, they were straight down the middle of what you call your linea alba. And so that is a ligament actually that holds our two muscle sides of muscles together, or quote unquote the six pack that most of us don't have, myself included. But that is one of the worst places that you could cut somebody, and because it doesn't heal. Ligaments are so hard to heal. That's why when people sprain their ankles, they stay injured. But my point is that because no one ever had them as a pregnant woman see a physical therapist, or after, they weren't able to activate those muscles that would have to compensate for that purposeful cut, right? And they fortunately don't do that way anymore. But I've had so many patients that have back pain later on. Now they're 40, 50, and 60. And it's clear to me that it's linked to a surgery they had back when they had kids. But what would that look like for them functionality and pain management wise if they could have had some intervention right after they were able to start going to the doctor? And in today's where we have virtual spaces for healthcare, that mom with their baby could have learned some things through the computer or the phone to do some exercises that would have helped her long term and avoid these pitfalls with just a little physical therapy referral.
Yeah, fascinating. So in the referral process, do you see any racial differences between, for example, whether Black people will be referred to therapy at the same rate as other people, or the frequency with which they're allowed to have therapy? What's been your experience in that regard?
Thank you for asking that question and in that way, because I don't have the exact data numbers on it, but I can tell you absolutely from my experience and some of the research that I have done. And some of the more recent research that I looked at was like CDC data on people with arthritis, and looking at specifically Blacks and whites and their experience with the being diagnosed with arthritis. And so what I can tell you are a few things. One, even though Blacks represent 13% or 13.4%, according to the latest data output of the United States, less than 3%, and usually decreasing amount of Blacks represent those who are physical therapists. And what we know about practitioners being of the same race and or ethnicity of patients, that they have better outcomes typically when they are treated by someone of similar or the same race or ethnicity. And so that difference in representation contributes to the health disparities that we see, and is no different in physical therapy, if not worse, since we are a profession where we touch people so much more than other practitioners, outside of maybe a surgeon who is cutting people open. But we're touching a person while they're conscious and awake and have the ability or potential to actually create a relationship and a rapport. And we do so usually repeatedly, because most people aren't referred or recommended to by their physical therapist to only come once a week unless there's some type of insurance barrier. So as far as people referring people to physical therapists, doctors' biases do not go away when it comes to that. And it's similar to what I would, in my experience, to what we see with pain. And what we know with pain is that if you or I as a Black woman were to go to the ER, we'd be less likely to be referred or given pain medication than a white woman, or let alone a white man, because we won't be seen as medication seeking. Those type of nuances don't go away when it comes to referring Black people to physical therapists or to other healthcare practitioners, period, right? So our care is already, what we are speaking is unfortunately not believed. And if it's not believed, then that means that you're not going to go down your differential diagnosis and treatment processes that you do, or you will, but you go down the other branch, which is no referral, instead of, why don't I have you go see so and so and so and so and so and so and see what they say. You're just assuming, or you're saying you're on Medicaid, and we're not even going to go there. Your Medicaid doesn't give us a lot of money back in return. As a practitioner, I'm billing $100, they're giving me $30. So I don't really think it's fair to the system. These are all these subconscious things that are happening inside of a practitioner's mind that ends up being different for the Black and brown people in front of them. And that includes physical therapy. Why would I refer you to a physical therapist if I don't believe that you really have pain, or that you're staying in physical therapy for 10 weeks when I only referred you for 4 weeks because you're a malingerer, not because there's actually something else going on that we need to look at more deeply.
I mean, that's, for Black people, that's, it's very frustrating. And I know Michelle mentioned that both of us have had surgeries and had physical therapy either before and after, especially. And I know that if you don't ask questions, you're not going to get any help. And if you don't know, then you don't know what to ask, But so let's go back to one of the studies I kind of read before, we got ready for this podcast. And it said that injured Black patients are more likely to be sent home when they leave the hospital rather than being sent to a rehab center or a skilled nursing facility. So if that's the case, so how can hospitals and doctors be made more accountable for this indifference or apparent indifference to the health prospects of Black patients?
I love that you shared that study and raised the question of accountability. One, the discrepancy has to be acknowledged, and to acknowledge the discrepancy, they'd have to be willing to, or someone like JCO, who are outside organizations who do, they basically do appraisals of healthcare facilities to see if they're meeting standards, right? So that has to be included in the standard, right? The standard of evaluation to see how excellent you are or are not as an organization. So if you include that in the standard of these outside organizations who do these assessments of the facilities, that's an easy way to get accountability, because no one wants to do badly on that. That's like going to the restaurant and you find out they have a D instead of an A on that little grade on the outside of the door. Like, no one wants that on their mark. So that would be one way to do it. One is to hold yourselves accountable and to do a self-assessment and look at your patients. Use the people in your facilities who have knowledge of either data collection, statistics, or research data analysis, and look at people across whatever categories you've actually collected, right? It's not all facilities collect race and ethnicity, as we found out when we went into COVID and people weren't collecting data. And that's a whole nother kit and caboodle, but the why as to why people wouldn't do that is even more telling than the fact that they just knowing that they didn't. So if people can do their own self-assessment across their data and then do it longitudinally across time, even if it's retrospectively, then you can have a benchmark from which to try to close any gaps that you do discern. Kudos to you if you don't see any discrepancy, but I doubt it. And that even includes in neighborhoods where most of the practitioners might not be white, right? Because what I know to be true is that even Black people treat Black people similarly, not the same, but similarly to the expectations we've been taught to treat each other with. So for example, more of a layman's example would be that if you, like the study they did with the kids and they showed who's prettier, the white person or the Black person, or if you do readings of the brain's response to you walking past a Black man in the street, both the Black man and the white man are going to have a response. One might just be greater than the other. So, and that's taught behavior, right? Not necessarily learned behavior. And so that doesn't go away in our treatment of people unless you become, like you said, accountable and held more aware and learn what to and not to do with that. And so what you have to do is say, this is how we're all going to treat people at our facility. Not like we're all going to treat people like Pollyanna. It means that you have protocols in place, and within your protocols, you work in the fact that you give leeway for meeting people where they're at, right? So if you have a total knee replacement or a meniscus tear or a brain surgery, these are the steps that we're going to take. And we make sure we hit all of those things that we say everyone should get, right? So that we make sure that everybody's minimum is the best standard of care, and that we alter it just based on some of the needs that might show up that look different, right, for each individual.
So let me ask you this. So when I was having my knee done and I was rehabbing, and I got to the end of my physical therapy sessions on my insurance, I went to them and I said to my physical therapist, I don't feel like I'm ready. I want more physical therapy. Okay. But now you have to fight that battle with the insurance company about what they're going to pay for. And what I found out was that as long as my doctor gives the okay, the insurance company's got to kind of comply. But not every Black person understands that. Or, as you mentioned before, those of us that are on Medicaid or have no insurance, we're not going to get that benefit. How do you rectify that?
Wow, that's a big question.
I do think that's a big question, but I think it's a necessary question. And I'm glad you raised it, because that was one of the things that I felt like I forgot to say earlier, is that there are several facilities and or practitioners, even private practitioners, that have quote unquote sliding scales, and even some, and there's to a lesser extent, have pro bono clinics. Like there actually are pro bono physical therapy clinics. They're far and few between, but they exist, and they're going to grow, because now, everybody is, I do not like to use the word, so I might not even use it, but now everyone's aware and awake and, being more, trying to do better or not look bad. And so I think we'll see a growing number of those. But one is education, right? So when you have big guns like your American Physical Therapy Association, which is the National Association for Physical Therapists, it only has, the members only represent about 1/3 of the cohort of all physical therapists of the United States. So with an organization like the American Physical Therapy Association, they could do a campaign, for example, on mitigating health disparities and include things such as the steps or things that clinicians in the field are already doing to inspire and to say that this is something we as physical therapists are responsible for too, and are not exceptions to the rule of mitigating, or that we don't actually even contribute to it. And I even give my students an example of how even I, as a Black person who has done research at Mayo Clinic, I did pediatric research where I was a primary investigator, very well tutored and mentored, and a co-investigating with Dr. Brandenburg, where all of my patients were white middle-class kids. And one might say, oh, well, you were in Minnesota. And I'm like, yeah, I could use that as a crutch. But what did I do to try to get people who don't look like all the kids that I worked with? I didn't. And nor did anybody tell me to, nor did anybody do what NIH is trying to do right now, or being pushed to do, and ask people when they're submitting their grant applications, have you included women? Have you included people of other races? Have you included people of different ages? Like, that has to be part of the protocol and the standard, as we spoke about earlier, like when I mentioned J-code. How do you force people to be accountable for and implement things that decrease disparities? And I am a a very firm believer that you do that in a way that mitigates people and their biases. In other words, I don't really care if Dr. Joe is racist. I need him to have to follow the same steps that keep me from him causing structural harm. And structural violence is that which is going to a healthcare practitioner or facility and them doing things that actually end up with me being harmed because I'm Black.
Mm-hmm.
And that's already ingrained in your system, right? I need the system to be flipped in a way so that that's not even an option. And the moment that something happens in the structural playbook that's not in alignment with this new structure that we have, protocol that we've designed, it triggers an alarm, right? And not after I'm dead or have a permanent disease or injury.
Okay, you've mentioned JCO twice now. So for our listeners who are not physical therapists, what is JCO?
Thank you for that. So JCO or JCHO stands for the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organization. And from the healthcare management degree.net website, they describe them as a nonprofit organization based in the United States that accredits over 20,000 healthcare organizations and programs in the country. So they are an organization outside of a facility, so they're not inborn in your hospital or my clinic or your clinic. It's an outside organization that comes in and says, do you meet all of these healthcare standards that we think should be in place for you to have a facility and a care facility that meets the basic standards for healthcare for the individuals that are being served.
Okay. So in the couple times that I've been to physical therapy, I've noticed I've actually only seen one Black therapist in the two separate times that I've been to physical therapy. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that. There don't seem to be a lot of Black therapists, and why would it be important for there to be more?
So I'll answer the last question first, because I think we briefly got to start touching on it earlier, which is that we know that if a Black practitioner treats a Black practitioner, regardless of whether it's a physical therapist or a medical doctor or neurologist, the outcomes of the patients are improved grandly and notably and statistically. And so if we want to see people do better, right, by speaking the same language, vernacular, knowing what to look for in their secondary contributors to their well-being, right? So their sleep, their home life, their ability to get to your appointment, transportation, where they live, knowing all of those things and knowing to look for that comes with people's experience. And that's not something that you can just teach people, right? So this whole idea of being culturally competent is nice, but there's not a book that's going to teach you how to be culturally competent and then you're just going to be done. There's some things that we just experience in life that you just don't teach, but you can teach people that learning to be open to people's sameness or differences and how you treat them will benefit the person in front of you for the short and long term.
So how do we get more Black therapists?
We get more Black therapists by creating pipelines that have smaller holes, right? Because there are pipelines that exist. We get them by adding them to some of the existing pipelines that exist for. So there are some that have, there's very strong pipelines for medical students to get medical degrees. Some of those programs can infuse or add physical therapy to their program so that you don't need to, there's probably not a need to start everything from scratch, right? To reinvent the wheels that already are working well. And so some people are doing that. Like there are some young physical therapists and physical therapy assistants right now in DC who have decided to go to APTA and say, hey, APTA is the American Physical Therapy Association. Can we have a few dollars because this is what we have planned? And so they created a pipeline and they've had people like myself come in and talk to students who are in high school and actually have them do modules of physical therapy. So we're not just talking at them, they get to do it and see what it looks like. And ideally, we're not waiting until people are in high school to expose them, because as I mentioned at the beginning, I decided what I wanted to do before I was even 12. And I just got exposed to it because of something bad happening in our family. So exposure, and at a very young age, and preferably with people who look similar to them, right? So you get more of us out there. And secondarily, you make it feasible. It's one thing to want to do something, is another thing to actually go to PT school that's going to cost somebody $150,000 to $300,000, right? And not have the means to give people grants, scholarships, or internships where they can do research to pay for it. So that's the other piece. And you can do that through policy. And that's what I didn't say earlier. We need to also have policy pathways that allow for physical therapists to be reimbursed for working in underserved and undersourced areas, and with populations who are underserved and undersourced, so that they have a way of paying back all these loans that they may need to take out. And then on the front end, allow them to have pathways to achieve grants and scholarships so that they can go to and finish the schooling from a financial standpoint.
So Hadia, your conversation with us today fits so nicely in the way we've been looking at health disparities in our communities for the past 2 years. So just to wrap it up, what are your final, what are the final takeaways you want our audience to appreciate from your conversation with us?
One, I would say that it's really important for people to know that physical therapists aren't just here for you to, when you are hurt or are in pain, to think of a physical therapist as a movement expert, everything from prevention to keeping you well, and including when you do get sick or have surgery. Two, that you too can be a physical therapist, and that the more Black physical therapists we have and the pathways that we create for them to enter this field, the more we can put out our message of education that we too are valued and our bodies are valued, and so is every system of movement in our body and our well-being.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I learned so much, Ray, and I know you probably did as well. So
for somebody that's had multiple surgeries, there's a lot of stuff that I still don't know about.
Right, exactly. So thank you so much, Hadia. We didn't get to talk about the research that you're doing. So at some point when we have scholars coming on and talking about research, we'll have to have you come back and talk about the research you've been doing with regard to race and therapy. So, but again, thank you so much for.
Thank you, Hadia.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
If you enjoyed what you heard today, visit our website, nubiantigerspodcast.com. In addition to the podcast, we also post a resource page for each subject to provide additional sources of information. Follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @NubianTigers, written as one word. We're also on YouTube on the Nubian Tigers podcast channel. Our podcast is hosted by Anchor FM, but if you have a favorite podcast app, we're probably on it. Just look for the Nubian Tigers Talk. Looking forward to sharing some knowledge with you next time.
Wake up, wake up, wake up.